Histories. Our next speaker, as you know, and we already know what he's going to talk about as well, maybe, is Bertrand Prévost, art historian and philosopher, lecturer at the University of Bordeaux, specialist in Renaissance Italian art and theory. Among many books, the author of La peinture en actes, gestes et manières dans l'Italie de la Renaissance, which is a highly recommendable book. And as we know, his research focuses on the aesthetic theory of expression, based on an expanded notion of cosmetics.
Thank you very much. I would start with a polemical aspect of my in my conference, since when I was a student in history of art, and now I'm not in the academic field of history of art, but I've always been, and I'm still completely puzzled by the evidences of the specialized discourse not on art but on works of art, and primarily in the discourse of history of art. When you read the catalog of an exhibition, you're completely fine. It's not a personal experience, but it's an experience I want to share with you. It's the level 0 of sensation, of aesthetic sensation, and of intelligence. But why? Where does it come from? Why always, when we speak about art, the idea of art, we can be brilliant, but when we speak about one work of art, it becomes very, very difficult to say something, to say something intelligent, sensitively intelligent. You see, all the formulas are always the same. Here you see a tree. Oh, yes, I see the tree. Here there is a man. There are four men in the painting. Yes, but and even the complexity of the most subtle iconological interpretation do not alter the case, because the complexity they put is a complexity outside the image. It's a complexity of the interpretation, it's a complexity of the meaning, so a complexity in the language, in the source, in the text, in the society, but not a complexity within the image. So the problem is still the same. And here I'm just not referring to the visceral mythology. You know, the mythology is, I guess it's Plato who uses this term. It's the mythology, mythos logos, is the hate of logos, so the hate of thought. I do not refer here only to the visceral mythology of art history, or more simply, its opposition to philosophical, to theoretical, to conceptual enterprises, although this would require a lot of comments. No, more simply, my confusion concerns something more spontaneous. What he said of the image. What the hell have I written? What he said of the images, the regime of intelligibility and of sensitivity that gives shape to analysis, comments on singular image. Of course, speaking of the evidence of such a discourse is obviously something strategic in my words, in my discourse, since the logical and intelligible evidence relates to sensitive materials and phenomena, what we call images. Suffice to say here that this evidence in the discourse means thinking the image itself as something evident. In both evidence, in both a phenomenological sense, something you feel, something you can sense, and in a logical sense, something you can understand, with something clear. And why I speak here about clear? It is precisely what the Cartesian concept of evidence, which was not a concept, which was not even a philosophical concept, but a pre-philosophical concept, meaning that evidence in Descartes is a manner, is determined as an image of thought before the act of thinking. First, there is evidence. Then we can begin to think. And this evidence in Descartes, you know, how is it called? It is the clear and the distinct. In French, le clair et le distinct. And so, when an image is said to be clear, it means what? It means just as it proves easy to say, as it proves easy to understand. And how does it actually feel? In our ability to distinguish, to differentiate, to divide in the picture, according to distinguish parts and aspects, extensive forms, and sensitive qualities. Some parts, some forms, some parts, and some qualities, some aspects, colors, colors, surface, textures, something like that. The best, to use a very famous iconographical example, I show you here the difference between Judith on the left and Salome on the right. To use, you know, you would have recognized the example used by Panofsky in his introduction to his studies in iconology. The distinction, I would say, the distinction between these two biblical figures can be both seen under a natural light that makes we see well the differences between these two figures, and can be the difference between these two figures can be understood and no more seen under an intellectual light by the means of a conceptual or intellectual iconological analysis. It's very easy for that moment, of course. I will name precisely this a regime of evidence of the image, a regime which are that? Peu importe. That regime that finds its original moment in the Renaissance, in Renaissance humanism, and especially in a foundation, in a founding treatise of the theory of art. I mean, Alberti's De Pictura. Indeed, when at the very beginning of his treatise, Alberti asserts that the painter, I quote like that, the painter is only concerned by what can be seen under the light. His gesture has an expanded, an unprecedented scope. That is to say that Alberti installs the painting in the element of a natural light. The idea that the sun, that the solar light, the natural light, is the condition of the painting, the condition of the the condition of the visibility. For a Christian at the same period, this is a nonsense. The visibility is not conditioned by a natural light, but by, if there is light, it will be a theological light, which will not be natural, but will be unnatural. The sun has a natural condition of the painting. You would say that that's for clarity. But on the other hand, for the distinction, it is the same. Actually, it is the same gesture that Alberti continue when the De Pictura is presented as a treatise on distinction, especially on the second book, when Alberti insists on the necessary distinction between all the surfaces, all the members. When he says, if you want to paint a face, you have to make the very distinction between the forehead and the thumb and the cheek. My vocabulary, I forgot it, but you see, the painter, like the Cartesian philosopher, will be the artisan, will be the specialist of the light by the whole comprehension of the image, and the artisan of the distinguishing the part into the parts of a body. The clear, so the clear and the distinct. The unity of something that can be sensed as a wholeness, as it can be understood or analyzed as a collection of parts. Therefore, we can understand how this regime of evidence comes to dazzle any form of problematicity, the fact to be a problem. I don't say not to deny it, not to crush, but to crush, to neutralize, to cancel any form of aesthetic problematicity. What does it mean? To oppose a problematic regime to a regime based on evidence. This is not at all a question of theory. Of course, my discourse, when I speak to you today, it is a theoretical discourse. But the object of my discourse is not at all theoretical. I'm not speaking about ideas, or strange ideas. I'm speaking about work of art. My proposition is very strange at this moment. Who can say, even in the time of Alberti, that the work of art, that the question of art is not a problem? Nobody, of course. Who can say that the image, I mean the concept of image, is not a theoretical problem, an aesthetical problem, a philosophical, a social, an historical, an anthropological problem, whatever you want? Nobody. But I'm not speaking of a concept, of an idea of art. I'm speaking, if these are legitimate questions, of singular works of art. Because all these questions about the problem of the anthropology of the work of art, or whatever you want, they do not challenge, these questions do not challenge the main issue, namely that the image itself, the image is not designed as a problem. We may well attribute ideas to works, to artworks, but these ideas still exist independently outside of material and sensitive images. They are simply represented by them. So, if we want to en finir, c'est to do with, not to do on, en finir avec. To? Oui, if you want to have done with this regime of evidence, we have to construct something like an aesthetic problem. But we must not say that the image raises a problem for a subject of knowledge, a subject of art. I mean, an art historian, a beholder, an art philosopher, an anthropologist, n'importe quel beholder. No. Rather, we must say that this problem has nothing subjective. That this problem, I don't say it is objective, this problem, but it's not at all subjective. It does not depend on the subjectivity of a beholder for whom the problem can be, will be able to be solved, to be resolved. No, this is not a real problem. Ça c'est un problème de connaissance. C'est l'idée que the problem is always a problem in itself. Not a problem for somebody, not a problem for a subject. A problem in itself. It's not that the problem won't be the problem I want to the concept of problem I want to build is not located in your mind, but in the image, because the problem is the image. You see, this is totally different to say that it raises a problem for us as theoretical or whatever you want. Actually, it is the aesthetic nature of this kind of problem that is extremely difficult to grasp. Because, at least from Aristotle, it is aesthetics as the element of sensation that it is aesthetics that will have set the framework from any obvious experience. By instance, the red color. The red color as a sensation of a color, of red color, can be explained. You feel it, you sense it, you feel it, but you cannot explain it, because you will say the red is red, the quality red is the quality red. If you want to explain it, you have to feel it, to send it. So this color will be evident. You won't be able to say anything about it. It won't be something problematic. The color won't be problematic. What would be a problematic sensation? It's very difficult for us to think that, because precisely it is the sensation which always has been linked to the idea of evidence, something that cannot be divided, something that appears in a totality, in its wholeness, in its evidence. If we want, but I don't have time to say why this notion should be given up. If I wanted to keep the idea of clarity of light, we should think something like a dark light. The dark light of an image, the dark light of a phenomena, something like a twilight, a chiaroscuro. But in just one word, I guess, or I have the intuition that all these stories of light in art, like elsewhere, smells too much theology. C'est toujours un truc comme ça. C'est toujours dès qu'on parle de lumière, il y a toujours un truc de théologie. So forget it, but I can explain it now. Bon, of course, it's just the very beginning of our problems, because now we still don't really know what to put behind this assertion, the aesthetic or plastic idea as problematic and not as of light, I would say that a problem, something problematic, always introduces the work of a difference, the work of a sovereign difference, of an heterogeneity. Always a problem describes a situation of incompatibility, of different something, and not necessarily the contrary, something and something else. Two, at least, au moins, two different things. If there is only one thing, this is evident, there is no problem. So the problem carries the idea, carries the experience of something different in the same experience, in the same thing, in the same form, in the same quality. So to be done with the evidence, with the regime of evidence of images, supposes to think them as division, suppose to think images as differentiation. But how? That is the question. That is the most difficult question. According what kind of division? What kind of differentiation? Differentiation between what and what? Of course, if I'm only philosopher, I say I will say that the image is an intensive phenomena. Of course, it is problematic. Everybody agrees, but I will have my hand will stay clean. Merci. Will be clean, but like Kant's moral, I won't have any hands. No. The thing is, what is the difference in an image? Where? How? How can you divide in an image? You think everybody think is sure to have the answer, but I'm not at all convinced by this answer, because this answer is based on this regime of evidence. What is the answer? What is the solution of evidence on this problem of division, of differentiation? It is the very trap of evidence to give us both the indivisible unity with the clarity of light and a separate divisibility. There is divisibility in evidence, because evidence, I recall you, is not only the clear, but it's the clear and the distinct in the two aspects of the same thing. But how must we think, thinking évidence, en pensant dans le régime d'évidence, how must we think this distinction? It's always distinction between parts, between forms and or between sensitive qualities. It is always a distinction in terms of extensive quantities and sensitive qualities. Suffice to say here that all these parts, forms and qualities, I should add, and meanings, are always homogeneous. Their mere addition makes the whole of the image. Exactly when Panofsky or n'importe quel iconologue, n'importe quel art historian interprets a detail, a part of the image. He interprets another part of the image, another part, and the addition of all this interpretation is supposed to give you the whole part of the image. So we are completely in the classical element, in the Cartesian, but it's not, I'm not making history of philosophy, because it is not only Cartesian, we are all Cartesian, all art historians are Cartesian, all art historians are Cartesian in this, for this moment, because we think the image in the element of res extensa. We think the image as something extended, divisible into parts and quality. But this is not for art. For philosophy, it is the gesture of Descartes, but for art, it is the gesture of Alberti. Alberti and all the Renaissance theoreticians of art put the image into this element of extension. All the importance of measuring, all the things. It's the way of thinking the image as something divisible into parts. The only difference we want to see in image is the difference between forms, so parts, and qualities. Partes, extra partes, according to classical expression. Des parties extérieures à d'autres parties. On the very contrary, considering the image as a problem assumes instead thinking in terms of heterogeneous quantity. This notion, this expression, heterogeneous quantity, is something completely paradoxical. Why? Because it is precisely by the homogeneity that from the classical times we tend to define the materia. The materia is, so the image as something material, as an object, will be defined as something homogeneous. So the problem becomes the following. How then to conceive that an image, one image, I mean a quantum, a quantity of space, materia, shapes, meanings, that this quantity, this one quantity, can be thought as a quantum, as a quantity, but this quantity as something not, which is not homogeneous, as a heterogeneous quantity. That's when it is at this very moment that Gilles Deleuze arrives, because Deleuze has not ceased to denounce such an illusion of homogeneous quantity. Taking turns to Nietzsche, both to Nietzsche and to Bergson. The mode of division of heterogeneous quantity is very strange indeed. It does not divide into parts, but it is not indivisible. It does not divide without changing his nature. It changes its nature by dividing. You will have recognized a certain kind of quantity, which is no more the extensive quantity, which is no more the quality or sensitive quality, but what we call the intensive quality, the intensive quantity. The intensive quantity. An intensive quantity, I still quote Deleuze, divides, but does not divide without changing its nature. In a sense, it is indivisible, but only it is indivisible only because no part predates the division and keeps the same nature by dividing. How then to imagine that an aesthetic idea, a problematic idea, a plastic idea is this strange division in a non-homogeneous differentiation, where the parts you get are not identical to the whole they formed. How can we avoid both the pitfalls of evidence? First, the first pitfall, the evidence of the whole, the evidence of an undifferentiated force, something absolutely clear. You cannot make division like a quality. You cannot divide, you cannot analyze this whole, the evidence of the whole. I would say this evidence here, standing in all its aesthetic implication, en français, une implication is the same word, une implication esthétique, and we know historically, anthropologically, how this will, this determination, all mystical, the mystical experience is based on this evidence of the whole. So the Christian experience, but also the phenomenological experience is based on this evidence, undifferentiated. But secondly, the second pitfall is to think the evidence as a power that only differs in extension, according to res extensa, and quality, standing all in its extensive and qualitative, not implication, but explanation. Non plus l'implication, I sense it, I feel it, I can explain it, but I feel it. This is for mystics, this is for Christians, this is for phenomenologists. And the other part of the evidence, I can explain it. A causes B. It's a mechanistic aspect, it's a mechanistic side of this theory of evidence. The one we know, by instance, with art history. They want to explain the images, but of course they don't manage because you cannot explain an image. I'm not saying here that an image must be felt, be sensed in a mystical way, of course. But we have to build, we have to construct, we have to think the aesthetic problem. So the condition is the following. It is necessary that intensive or plastic divisions are not adequate to extensive and qualitative divisions, and Deleuze's lessons I use here again Deleuze's lessons. The intensity should never be confused with what covers it. Always the intensity, the intensive quantity, is involved, impliqué in extension and quality. And intensity, intensive quantity vanishes or releases when you want to explain. Non plus impliqué, mais when you want to explain by them, by forms, extensive forms, and qualities. So a plastic idea, as it is intensive, will never be distributed according the order of extensive and qualitative parts. This does absolutely not mean that parts and quality are irrelevant, that the intensity is irrelevant to extended form and qualities. But it means that it does not coincide. It's not the same thing. It does not coincide with this extensive and qualitative state of thing by which it is expressed. So we have to point out a very important thing. If the plastic idea is heterogeneous to forms, extensive forms, and qualities, and or if it can do, Il ne peut pas s'en passer. Voilà, il ne peut pas s'en passer. Can you imagine an image without qualities and without forms? The image will disappear. But saying that does not mean that the image is that the plastic idea, that the image as a potential, the image as an expressive thing is can be reduced to forms, extensive forms, qualities, and meaning. But you will have understood that for me, meaning is put inside an extensive dimension. The plastic, the plastic idea does not determine itself in qualities and in form without producing distortions, paradoxes, incongruities in the qualities and in the forms. The plastic idea, so, is always discontinuous, not in itself, but discontinuous from the point of view of formal and qualitative evidence. That's why it's not evident. That's why it's problematic, because from the point of view of what you can recognize, feel, understand, I'm gonna develop, it's not evident. It's problematic. For example, it's not an example because I'm speaking from the beginning of my talk. I'm speaking about images. But if I show you this image, it's a detail of painting by the Pollaiolo brothers in Florence at the end of the 15th century, figuring the rape of Deianira. I would say it is a Warburgian example, so I don't have time to explain why I speak of Deianira as a nympha. It's not it's not necessary for us at this moment to understand that, to know that. But I would say that the nympha as a quantum, as an intensity, as an intensive quantity, that this intensity nympha stands as much as in the iconographic identity, individuality of the character of Deianira. Here, the woman represented, the woman we can represent, we can think of, yes, it is a woman. The fact that this form is a woman is evident, of course. But the intensity of the nympha stands also as much in, I would say, in the slenderness. Here, you see, in the slenderness of the tree next to her, as if Deianira could not escape from her captor without turning herself into tree. Becoming so, we would have understood at the same time Daphne. So there is a strange Deianira Daphne, Daphne and Apollo. But likewise, she. Actually, I could not say she, but it. Because the intensity is a non-personal thing. It's not a subject, so I should say it and not she, but laissons ça de côté. Likewise, the nympha as intensity can still stand in the white foam of the river as if her diaphanous dress mingled with the folds of water. Here, there is no iconographic evidence in this formal and qualitative discontinuity. No one can recognize Deianira in a tree or in the folds of the river. You cannot distinguish it, but you can sense her, it, as an intensity in the distortion of the continuation of evidence of a young and beautiful woman. But precisely, for nympha, precisely is not a woman. So the aesthetic intensity, the plastic idea, is always transverse regards to extension and qualities. The problematic nature of the plastic idea can be noticed in these formal and qualitative improbabilities, because a tree is not a woman, a form is not a woman, so it is naturally improbable, as well as this problematic nature can be noticed in a conceptual impossibility. This is precisely why is it intensive. It only can be sensed and not represented. It can be sensed and not feel, and not thought. Second example. Take, here is Montaigne Saint-Georges at the Academia in Venice. And look at... Ah non, alors là, ça va pas du tout. Why the image is cut? In the PowerPoint, the image is cut. It is very important. Ici. Pourquoi c'est coupé comme ça? Ah, c'est... Si, c'est... Bon, enfin, tant pis, mais... to go back to the screen. Thank you. Yeah. So you don't see the dragon here, but there is something from an iconographic point of view very strange in this image, since the dragon lacks one of his main parts, iconographic parts. I mean the tail. This dragon has no tail, so you know it's an iconographic all given. There is no dragon without the snake tail, without a tail. But where is the tail here? You can see the tail consists pictorially in this strange path mountain landscape, which is also the tail of the dragon. But this tail is no more an iconographic idea, an intellectual representation, because you cannot conceive, you cannot represent a tail, snake tail mountain path. You can see it, and it is precisely what Montaigne has invented. But you cannot represent. If you want to represent it, it means you are Montaigne, because Montaigne did it to imagine it. So it can only be sensed and not represented. This is obviously not, when I say only sensed and not represented, it's not a restriction or a lack of anything. It is a way of saying that the plastic idea is always intensive. You can sense, but you cannot make any concept. There is a concept of path, there is a concept of mountain, there is a concept of dragon or tail dragon, but not a concept of, and you see in the language, I must invent a word that does not exist, tail path, dragon tail path, and making two words. But in the picture, there are not two words, there are not two parts. There is one thing. You experience, you feel this plastic idea as a whole. So that's why I was talking about a conceptual impossibility, something impossible from the point of view of the concept. The plastic idea is problematic insofar as it implements as an impossible, a natural, physical, chromatic, aspectual, technical, whatever you want, as a condition of an unthinkable, which detracts nothing from its aesthetic positivity. Of course, quite the contrary. However, could the image problem, the image as problem, be reduced to a difference or contradiction between two or maybe three, four given states of thing, something like a kind of duck rabbit? You know this famous image or type of image. No, because we then would forget that the plastic idea always evolves in a transitive dimension. The elements of the problem are never fully given. They are not given. They can be partly given. But rather, the problem is the precipitate of a given state of things, pictorial, aesthetic. The problem does not exist before its data, shapes, color, qualities, significance if you speak for color and surfaces. If you speak about painting, for sculpture and other forms of art, of course, the data are different. That is to say that the plastic idea is always still, that is to say that the plastic idea sees always something like a becoming, something. So I mean to introduce a transitive dimension of the problematicity. From the point of view of the painting, and to confine to it, it's very important that here I'm speaking only about painting, but only as example. It is clear that there are some becoming that are forbidden, not as a moral, or I don't know what, whatever you want, moral for moral reason, but there are some forbidden becomings or impossible becomings due to their nature of non-problem, of aproblematic nature, because this non-problem, they would give an intransitivity to the painting. I mean, it's very simple what I mean. I mean that for the painting, there is no becoming painting of the painting, because becomings is always transitive, something heterogeneous, something which is not what it is. So you can say that in front of a painting, there is a becoming painting of the painting. It was nonsense, because there is no transitivity. Maybe it can be, and we shall see in a few minutes. We shall see an example. There can be a becoming painting of love experience. Why not? Because love has nothing to do with painting. You know, the becoming is always related to this heterogeneous dimension. I must recall here. Always we must remember the canonical formula of the becoming, such as Deleuze and Guattari said. What you become, the object of your becoming. If we can speak about object, what you become becomes as much as the one who become. What you become becomes as much as the one who becomes. The becoming is not a mere transformation. It's not the passage from a situation to another, but the becoming is always a transitivity in the things themselves and not between the things. Becoming means a differentiation, an interior differentiation in the things themselves, and no a difference between nothing and another, extensive difference or qualitative difference. Bon, je sais plus, je parle depuis longtemps, non, peut-être très longtemps, non? Oui, ça va, c'est un petit 10-15 minutes. Because I want now to develop a more extensive, more larger example. Maybe I hope more, d'autant plus important that it is about color. I show you here an Ecce Homo by Tintoretto in the Scuola di San Rocco in Venice, and I would determine like 3 moments or 3 levels of problematicity or becoming. The first level would be something that I would want to call it a becoming blood of the passion. Becoming blood of a becoming blood of the purple mantle. Something like a colored kingship. Look at the mantle of Christ. You see, everybody knows that an Ecce Homo presents the Christ as the king of the Jews, as a humiliated king, with his crown of thorns, his scepter, etc., etc. But here, the coat, the mantle, has not its traditional purple color. This mantle is white. It's a large white coat stretched behind the figure of Christ, much more like a curtain, or in the painting, a curtain of honor a curtain of presentation for a figure, more than voilà. But by its whiteness and by its dynamic of wrapping, this coat, in the sense of biblical prefiguratio, this coat prefigures the shroud, le linceul, the shroud, excuse me, the shroud that soon will wrap the body of the dead God. The white coat is, however, turning red, stained with the blood of the Passion. And by dyeing red, this drape is becoming a royal mantle. This means at least two things. This means first, not only that the kingship of the Christ is not acquired, but that the kingship of Christ is produced, acted. But also, second thing, it means that it is the humility of Christ which consecrates his kingship by, I would say, it is a pictorial word, by the anointing of his own blood. L'onction in French. And you know what means Christ, Christos in Greek. It means the anointed one, le oint. That's why, you know, in the ritual of consecration of French kings, at the moment of the sacre, the French king was anointed by the bishop of Saint-Denis. That's why it was a way to consecrate his relationship with the Christ. And what is so important here for us is that it becomes all that becomes a question. It's not biblical stories, what I tell you. It's color stories. Because the man, Christ, conquers his regalia through his blood, through the color of his blood. The red color here is no more an abstract quality, an abstract quality, sensitive quality, a kind of symbolic color you could interpret, you could get, whose meaning could be read in the dictionary of color, where you could see red color of the mantle of the kings. No, it would be a sensitive quality given, data given, and not produced by the painting in a transitive dimension. Here, the red is not a mere iconographic color, because it's not red. The mantle is not red, it's white. It indicates rather a becoming red, making indistinct blood and kingship. Is it here the red? Is it the red of the kingship or the red of the blood? We can distinguish both. That's why it is a becoming. C'est something like something which makes indifferent, dans une relation de voisinage, to speak like Deleuze, entre sang et royauté. Comment concevoir? How can you conceive that there is qu'il y a quelque chose d'indifférent entre la royauté et le sang, et que ça passe par la couleur rouge? C'est le rouge, vous voyez, sang, royauté, et c'est le rouge qui tire. Mais le rouge, c'est plus une qualité, c'est un devenir, justement. Bon. In French, we have a beautiful expression, a colloquial expression to say that. When you say in French, faire des histoires, what I mean is la passion devient une histoire de couleur. But in French, faire des histoires ou être une histoire de couleur, it's the colloquial way to say un problème de faire des histoires means in French faire des problèmes. So when I say these are stories about stories of color, it means c'est un problème de la couleur. La couleur n'est pas donnée, elle est problématique. Bon, first level, three levels. First level of becoming. So, becoming, there is nothing about painting now. You agree? Il n'y a rien de pictural. C'est un devenir, a becoming red of the passion. The passion, like the passion. Why there is becoming? Because the passion has nothing to do with color. The passion of Christ is the story of body, of suffering, of man of dolor, of Roman, of whatever you want. But if you think as Christian or non-Christian of the patient, you don't experience something colorful. But qu'est-ce que ça fait de dire que la passion devient un événement coloré, becomes something in color? It's not a coloration of the passion. It's a becoming colorful of the passion. This was the first level. But second level, this act of the blood is at the same time a remarkable act of painting. Now there is painting, because what happens to the white coat, to the white mantle of Christ, merges with what happens in front of Tintoretto when the painter was painting. I mean, a white canvas is coloring, a white canvas is being stained, so that Christ's coat colors as much by the action of the blood as by the action of painter's brush. It is the same gestures, it is the same form which literally acts here. We know the devotional aspects of Tintoretto's painting, but we must understand this devotion because Tintoretto used to give his paintings to a community, to religious community. But it may be here. We don't must see that as a matter of iconographic or function of social function of the problem as a problem of painting. In this case, it would be less a matter of meta painting, so to speak like Victor Stoichita in his l'instauration du tableau. So you know meta painting in the painting representing the painting thinking the painting by the means of painting. Because it is very interesting that, but the problem in this meta painting it's that we think in analogic terms. What you see in the painting, it's analogous. There is an analogy with what the painting is. But becoming an analogy, ça marche pas du tout. Ça va pas du tout ensemble. So forget it. I prefer now here to see the blood as something which makes becoming the painting, plugging it to a Christ-like becoming of the painting. Painting becomes authentically Christian when it opens to the power of the stain, the macula. Because you would have understand the macula, I say it in Latin, the macula in the mantle are the same, are biblical maculas, but also brushes, spots, brushes, splashes. Painting, let's say, painting with splashes always mean humiliate the form as well as the media. So the macula is something Christian in itself. Moreover, the drape stained with the blood becomes here a figure of the veil of Veronica, of the Holy Face, whose face consists precisely only in a field of splashes, in a field of spots. And just moreover, just look at the executioners were behind the Christ to set the mantle of this mantle, precisely like Holy Veronica holds the mantle. It's the same presentation, it's the same gesture. You know. Bon. So this was the second level, and that is to say, an act of painting. First level, a becoming blood, a becoming red of the patient, and a becoming painting of the patient. The patient being acted like painting, because the gesture of the painter acted by the macula he produced the moment of the humiliation. The humiliation, where it's the same thing. It's another way to ask to raise the problem. Where is the humiliation here? First, you can say it is iconographic. It's a humiliation of Christ, but the humiliation is always in the gesture of the painter who humiliates is painting, making some marks. The marks of painting here are not painted like that. They are literally. That's why it was an act of painting. But of course, I can say, and je serai en train de me contredire, I cannot say that there is a becoming painting of this painting. No, there is a becoming painting of the passion. If the color of the passion is done as an act of painting, if it enters into a becoming painting, it is only as the painting becomes something else. Indeed, the passion here is not only an act of painting, it becomes also an act of dying. Dying, of course. The code colors less by pictorial projection as by staining impression. By instance, look at here the flow of this strange red drapery, which should be on the shoulders of the Christ, but which flows on the stairs, whose folds fall like waterfalls of blood on the stairs. This code, we should say, is no more painted, but dyed with blood. You know, there is much to say. There would be much to say about the dying fluidity in Tintoreto's painting, and I don't want to show you other painting, other picture. All this colorful fluidity, the fact that there is not only a dramaturgy of bodies in Tintoreto's painting, but a dramaturgy of painting and a dramaturgy of color. All this body falling like dying drips on a tissue when it is humid, not dry. So all of Tintoreto's painting is here concerned. For Tintoretto himself has reflected this becoming, first of all, in his proper name, in his surname, in his name, because Tintoretto, you know, everybody knows it, means the little dyer. And Tintoretto signed some of his painting, Tinctor Rectus. But Tinctor Rectus doesn't mean the honest dyer. The honest dyer in Latin would be Tintor Rectus. But he signed Tinctor. Tinctor is the linguistic determination of this becoming dying of the painting, because tinctor is the mixture of pictor and tinctor. Of pictor and tintor. In English, how could we translate it in English? We could say, I found a solution. The Tintoretto as the honest dieter, mixture of dyer and painter. In French, we could say Tintoret, le tintre de Venise. Tintre, between teinturier et peintre. Voilà. You see, there is something problematic because this word does not exist, but it exists in the painting. Craft production. There are so many aspects of the craft production in Tintoretto's painting of these stories of dying. It's not stories; it's of the becoming of this dying, becoming dying. An economic point of view, because as I told, 4 minutes. 4 minutes. For me, c'est juste ça. Tintoretto used to give his painting. Vasari blames in his biography him for giving his works as if they had no economic value. It's exactly like a dyer, as a craftsman and not as an artist, as a craftsman and not as an artist, the production has a less value as if it were a work of art. But even in the manner of working for Tintoretto, since his production is huge. He has painted hundreds and hundreds of paintings. Like a craftsman, allez, another one, allez, vas-y. So there is no projection of colorito but a dripping, something even in the gesture of painting, which is taken which is of the dyer, and all these finds something like a cultural expansion when you know that during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Venice was the capital in Europe, in Western Europe, was the head of the dyeing. But there is a but. All the tradition in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance of dyeing show the very strange aspect of this craft industry, which was completely disapproved because it was thought as something almost demonic due to the very strange aspects of the science of mixtures to get the color. What do they do with the color? We don't know. There may be something with the devil, something like demonic. But also think about the pollution of rivers, the pollution by the color. Can you imagine if there is a workshop of dyer in the city? What will be the color of the river 100 meters after? And also the pollution due to the stinking smell due to the use of ammoniac, and you know how do they produce ammoniac with the sheet of animals. Well, all this stuff, and this is my words of conclusion. All this stuff about dyeing, maybe the most powerful becoming of Tintoretto's painting. Becoming, I insist, for his painting is not dyeing. His painting is painting. That's why it's becoming. The dyeing I'm talking about is not, even if it is linked, is not the dyeing as an identity. It's not the dyeing as we can see, as we can identify it in the history of the craft industry. It's an impossible dyeing because it's a painting dyeing. It does not exist. It does not exist in the social life in history, but Tintoretto has made it real. More precisely, this painting dyeing, this becoming dyeing of the painting, avoid us celebrating all these abstraction of pure color, surface effects, chromatic qualities, and other things like that. Of course, Tintoretto was a great colorist, but it doesn't mean anything if you cannot see that the color is never pure. But always, surtout pas always, but sometimes the color can be expressive. Not always, but because color is not always expressive. Sometimes it is expressive. This sometimes is the most important thing. Sometimes it is expressive. But expressive color then means only one thing, that color becomes something that color becomes something else than color. Dyeing, but 3 points. It depends on the invention. It depends on the creation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm going to. Well, I've got a sort of polemical title or retitling, which is what is the function of a plastic idea, or what does a plastic idea do? Which I think in some ways we can think of as the groundless problematic ground to the question that you pose as the title, insofar as it is the idea of function as matter function, that predetermines the form of a question. So on that note, I'm going to, after that, thank you for a thought-provoking paper. And I use the term thought-provoking deliberately, insofar as the paper poses itself, or poses a problem of a problem problematically, whereby we might understand the problem after Deleuze as that which forces the genesis of a new thought and of a new form of thought, rather than the recognition of what is already evident to thought, to a form of thought possessed by the thinking subject, the recognition that would precisely permit and demand an answer. So as such, it's going to be inappropriate for me to provide an answer to Bertrand's paper, but it would also be inappropriate for me to sort of produce any kind of resembling claims. So the only way out of this, I think, is to emphasize what I consider to be its most intriguing potentials for art history, whilst introducing a few affirmative extensions. So not positive ones, but affirmative ones. And here, I think we can remember, or kind of try and think about the problem as that which operates in the outside of art history's image of thought, and to the form or image of thought as such. So here, it's not about replacing one image of thought, the clear and distinct, with another, like the irrational or even the speculative image of thought, but actually to overturn the idea of the image of thought with the Deleuzian idea of the thought without image. And this is something that cannot be posed by the art historian subject, but, as Bertrand very rightly pointed out, has to be proposed by the work of art, insofar as the work of art functions ontologically as the being of sensation, or the matter function that poses itself to thought. So it's a problem of Tintoretto's difference that actually forces a new kind of thought, and it cannot be represented by the clear and distinct representational image of thought that already exists. So I think perhaps the most important thing to come out, one of the most interesting things to come out of Bertrand's paper is really the displacement of the dialectic of the question and answer, motivated by the epistemological inquiry that precisely forecloses answers in advance and forecloses the form of the question by answers already inherited by art history. That is to say, there's a continuity of discourse perhaps already grounded in the continuity of the form of the question and the answer couplet. The displacement of that dialectic by the problematic idea that is always in excess of its possible answers. So this ontological excess to determine solutions, constituting precisely what Bertrand calls the in-itselfness of the problem. And I think this really poses quite important implications for the way in which art history might move beyond its own habitual, and I use that word polemically, Adi, I'm afraid, inheritance of recognized questions. For precisely such a problematic or problematizing method, in inverted commas, would, I think, entail a persistence of the obscure, but not the obscure that is determined as the after effect of that which remains after the clarity of illumination through the regime of facticity or positivity, but rather the obscure as the groundless field of difference. So here we have perhaps a model in, well, insofar as we might think of problems of attribution or chronology in art history, the form of those kinds of questions which remain problematic as determined in the image of the solution. So this is the wrong kind of image, such that, for instance, the problem of dating or naming or classifying a particular work may be determined as what remains after historians have failed to date it. So this allows the element of negativity into the form of the couplet of the question and answer. And I think this is what exactly the potential of the problematic or differential or plastic idea allows us to think beyond, because it does renounce this kind of negativity or negative determination. So the posing of problematic ideas would challenge and overturn art history's epistemological image of thought, but it would indeed challenge the upholding of the image of thought as such, which is why, as I said before, it's not about replacing one image with another, not about replacing an epistemological one with a speculative one. but rather trying to produce a new imageless thought without image, the image whereby real solutions precisely resemble the possibility mapped by the question in advance. So here, in place of the clarity of illumination by the regime of facticity or positivity, such a posing of the problem would entail precisely a persistence of the obscure as the originary field of inexhaustible difference. And this is why we can return to Tintoretto and the problem that he raises in new ways, which doesn't exhaust or overdetermine through a process of attributing signification to what he does. So this is how actually the way in which dying functions has to be very subtly mapped out, because it's not a new interpretation. In fact, it's precisely that element of the outside of the regime of signification. It's an asignifying sort of vector, if you like, that signals the inexhaustible outside of his practice. So dying is just a nomination for this outside, right? And that's why I think it's very important to say it's not about him being a painter or identifying him as a dyer, but actually dying functions as the interstice, the nameless interstice between two identities that we can attribute to him, right? I think. So again, you know, who asks this problem? It's not precisely the historian's subject. Rather, the problem is posed by the work of art itself, the work of art in itself, not as a form demanding to be made intelligible or interpreted, but precisely the artwork as a diagrammatic, and I want us to return to this, Bertrand, diagrammatic machinism of intensities, which calls into question the intelligible relations between forms, which is hence the limitations of iconography and the iconographic method. So here, the issue is, rather than posing a question or questioning works of art, or sort of projecting questions onto the field of artworks, the problem is that which is posed by the singularity of an artwork in its difference beyond the structure of the general and the particular, which a method of projecting questions allows. So here we also have a critique of method, I think, in place of a sort of thought of the singular, which is precisely anti-methodical because it cannot be formalized as method. So here I think I'd like to turn to Bertrand's reading of Tintoretto, which in many ways affirms my own. Maybe I'll just raise one sort of point of contention, but not as contention, but hopefully as affirmation. So what Bertrand's saying, I think it's interesting to repeat it again in order to bring out the sort of new element of the reading. Tintoretto poses a problem to art history with the production of coloristic, intensive, differential ideas. So his use of color, or dying as a use of color, is his idea. Right? It is his idea. That's his idea. And he doesn't know it. It's not an idea that belongs to him. But this is the plastic idea of his painting. And it's a coloristic idea, which is not an idea that belongs to the regime of the form of color in his time. And I think what's very interesting about the problem of dying is that it completely traverses the sort of formal categories of disegno and colorito that are attributed to the form of painting in his time. So here we also have the idea of dying, or a modulation of color, a sort of machinic treatment of color, as untimely, you know, and somehow the problem therefore exceeding any kind of intelligibility that can pass through the sense attributed to his time, to the form of painting at his time. So I'd like also to talk about that, the relation between idea and the temporality beyond the work's historicity. So with the at least 5 minutes, Okay. I have to talk about Tintoretto. So with this production of the coloristic differential idea, there's a traversal of the symbolic or iconographical function of color in the Historia with its Christian content. So this is the way in which we actually traverse, again, the form of Historia that is historically determined, right, the form of Historia in his own time, the Christian content, so the question of the dualism between form and content, the methods that can be used to interpret, i.e., this ontological access to the sense that can be reconstructed through iconography. And this material modulation of color as the expression of a dying that launches painting into a becoming beyond its historically legible coordinates. But my issue here is that I don't think we begin with painting, because I think dying actually operates outside painting. And Tintoretto himself is, in his processes of composition, is working outside of the field of painting, because he has a whole sort of setup, a very, which I call the staging of material that takes place outside painting and then is transposed into painting. So the question of becoming painting does not begin with painting, but it begins with a dying, groundless ground that we can recognize as a becoming painting. So the problem is actually a beyond painting. This is what's quite, I think, polemical about Tintoretto. And so dying, again, cannot be understood as a new formal identity. And here, I think, if any of you know of Sartre's reading of Tintoretto, and as the dyer, as the kind of artisan who is the minor undercutting of the bourgeois artist and the identity of the bourgeois artist. I think I completely disagree with this interpretation of dying and the way dying functions. I don't think it has any existential determinants, and I think when you talk about the form of dying at the time, it's only in order to show the limitations of that kind of discourse. So 2 minutes, because I have to get to this end. So instead of a painter, Tintoretto's dying must be understood as the diagrammatic element of his practice, where the diagram or the diagrammatic element of a practice is precisely the inexhaustible element of an outside to which the name dying is incidental. The experimental vector of a practice that is always futural in its nonsensicality. And so here, the idea that Deleuze introduces of the diagram as the interstice between two forms of legibility, like between, like the form of visibility and the form of the articulable from Foucault, but between two forms as such, between two regimes of signification, as that which operates in this nameless interstice. The name dying would actually be futural, but it will also function as what he calls the a priori of history. So, which is something, again, that can only be affirmed through return, and it's only something that can be affirmed through artistic return of this informal interstice. So the question is, how do we talk about this informal outside? In a way, it's only one answer is only through its own affirmation of difference, for instance, in the return of Tintoretto's work in other practices, like Adam Alzheimer's. One small, very short note on the speculative, because I do think we have to end with this. I do think that the plastic idea is, as Bertrand sets it up, is not speculative. It's not speculative, and I think this is important because it allows us at least to problematize or sort of go beyond a certain idea of speculative that we have been sort of working with. And it's not speculative insofar as it determines a reality now, all at once, in place of the hypothesized future answer to the form of a question. So that's one way I don't think it's speculative. But furthermore, instead of being it's also not speculative insofar as it is immanent to the matter of which it thinks. So the there cannot be, so this also problematizes a speculative use of philosophical concepts by art history. Because insofar as a problem is posed by artistic practice, it demands a genesis or produces a genesis of concept. This is what Deleuze calls. The genesis of concepts is grounded in the problem. You pose a problem and the concepts follow that imminently. You don't begin with concepts and apply them to material. And I think this way round raises a very intriguing question for the way in which art history might relate to philosophy, to art history's becoming philosophical, insofar as it might think problematically and produce its own concepts imminent to what the work of art challenges it to think, beyond speculation.
Thanks a lot, Kamini. I think you confuse the economical or financial concept of speculation with that the philosophical concept, but we can talk about that later. Yes, I would propose that Bertrand take some time to reply to the questions of Kamini, but we don't have time for discussion, I'm afraid. So, but in order for that also to be time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience, I think that's how we need to proceed. Yeah.
The problem will be maybe linguistic. I try in English, but no, you speak only English, so I have to speak English. Well, I cannot answer all the questions, all the points you have evoked. Maybe the most important, and I didn't have time to develop it in my paper. When you ask me, but of course, if I understood well, and correct me if I'm wrong. Of course, intensive idea or plastic idea cannot be taken for confused with qualities, form, and it's the same thing for the outside of the painting. The dying I'm talking about. It's not the dying as we the dying as we can know it socially, historically, in its formal identity. But how can we talk about it if the dying I'm talking about has not is not identical to the dying, to the historic, à la teinturerie identifiable. Comment est-ce que ça marche? Comment est-ce qu'on passe de ce truc? Comment est-ce qu'on passe de l'un à l'autre? I want to use here another Deleuzian notion, the concept of drama. C'est ça. The link between, in différence et répétition, what makes the relationship between the idea, in the Deleuzian sense, the idea and the sensation and the intensity is the drama. The drama has something to do, but it's not identical to the famous Kantian schemes. Schemes, on dit les schèmes. Schemes, les schèmes, le schématisme. Non, pas schéma. Voilà, schematism and Kant. Voilà. C'est-à-dire que Deleuze doesn't speak about schematism, it speaks about drama. The drama is a dynamism, always spatial and temporal, which is very not empirical, but it's something. It is something that you must feel, that you must invent, that you must construct. It depends on your sensibility and it depends on your intelligence, if I can, si je peux me permettre. C'est-à-dire qu'il faut l'inventer. Pourquoi, pour prendre l'exemple du travail de Georges Didier Huberman, why it is so fascinating? Because he has this wonderful ability to invent dramas, to see the idea in the painting, but inventing, constructing the drama of the painting. But the drama is not done, it's not given. The artist, of course, doesn't need to tell or to make it obvious, evident, of course. And c'est comme ça qu'on peut répondre. C'est par l'invention de ces drames, de ces schèmes qui doivent se sentir et se penser, mais il faut les inventer. I insist on this creative dimension of the drama. C'est-à-dire, I mean, that is to say that the historical, sociological, given dying, given the sociological and historical acted dying, one has to invent something in the dying, historically attested, to make the link with the intensity in the painting. Et ça, there is no method, there is no recette. Recipe. There is no recipe. It depends on you. C'est, you know, dans la critique de la raison pure, Kant says that the schematism it's a mystery of the soul. Well, it's always a problem when a philosophe speak about the mystery of the soul. Surtout quand il est, most of all, and when he is so rationalist as Kant was. Bon. Maybe this is only the only one point.
Samuel, how flexible are we? Guess.
Maybe one question from the audience.
Okay.
Yes, I was wondering, why do you, I mean, it's very interesting to have a philosopher like Deleuze every 30, 50 years so to generate so much thought, but there is a methodological problem at the core of your interesting presentation, namely that I don't know why you need Deleuze for it, because your analysis actually rests on something that you primarily reject, namely the phenomenological analysis. You say, you look at an image, thinking, I quote you, thinking an image as something you sense. But the phenomenological tradition tells us that the image consciousness, what Husserl called the Bildbewusstsein, is not the same as the consciousness of a perception of something in the flesh, just perceiving you or me and so on and so on. So the analysis that you perform, the fact that the image, what he calls ein Bildobjekt, is something independent and a structure independent of the materiality, of the meaning, of iconological meaning of the picture, that is something that is being historically dated since 1880 or something like this, yeah? First point. So the fact, and then that is the thing that I think it's very important methodologically to know that you don't need Deleuze for this. And second of it, I mean, it's pure phenomenological analysis, but then in the sense of Husserl, and not, I don't know, the recyclation in France, but in the sense of the Bildbewusstsein in Fantasie von Husserl. And second of all, there is the problem. I would like you to tell me, how would you distinguish your model of image analysis, but methodologically, not in the content, from Max Imdal's Iconique, because Max Imdal in the 50s, I think must have been in the 60s, developed a model that is really analogous to this, saying that what you call basically a becoming, a devenir d'une image, an intensity that is different from the subject, different from the meaning that I see, different from expression certainly, is what precisely following a rigorous phenomenological analysis, he called it is the level of the iconic. And he applied this very concretely, what you did here, he applied it to Giotto's Scrovegni, to the Arena Chapel. And exactly what you did here, he was writing the Kiss of Judas, the painting, the famous painting from the fresco from the Arena Chapel, where that club and the unite, there is a club there, in the mass that is fighting, and then you have the kiss between Judas and Jesus, and somebody pointing at their kiss. And that he precisely, what you called un devenir d'une image in the 60s, Imdal called it an iconic, from a level that you see it, that it's in the picture, in the sense that but it's not represented by the material in the picture, see? So if you can make this distinction, if you can tell me how you distinguish yourself from Imdal, then you found something completely new.
I must admit that I don't know. What's the name of? I must admit I don't know. No, I don't know. So I cannot respond for answer for that if I want to be serious. For Deleuze and Husserl, from a certain point of view, you're right. I don't need Deleuze. But what I'm sure, I don't even less need Husserl. J'ai encore moins besoin de. Je pense que j'ai encore moins besoin de Husserl. Ça c'est. J'ai peut-être pas besoin de Deleuze, mais j'ai encore moins besoin de Husserl. Because Husserl, you must admit, when he talks about image, he doesn't talk about art image. Image is not his problem.
You criticize Husserl, and I'm not a phenomenologist, but like you criticize that they always phenomenology experience is always one of the whole.
Oui, c'est ça.
No, at least in my reading of Husserl, you always there's always the problem that you don't have the whole. You know, whatever you see, I see Rick's back. You know, I can go to the right and then I see his right, and but I never have the whole Rick. You know, so when you criticize Husserl and then you say you don't need him, but you ascribe something to him that I'm not sure whether it wouldn't maybe be useful for your analysis.
The problem, when I speak about phenomenology, it is about aesthetic phenomenology. You know, in France, at the university, all the aesthetic in the department of philosophy, it's phenomenology. Why don't they speak about paintings, about images, about works of art? Because they always have they always say the same thing. It is always the same painter. You know, it's always Cézanne, because since they say it's intensive, it's le sentir. Read Maldinet, by instance. Maldinet, qu'est-ce qu'il a à nous dire sur un tableau, Maldinet? Sinon qu'il y a le sentir, quelque chose qui vient comme un tout. Donc it's logical that at the end, it's always the same. It's always the same. C'est toujours Cézanne, la présence, Cézanne. Il y a pas. C'est là toujours. It's always a question of the difference. Mais il ne parle pas de peinture, Sartre. C'est pas son problème, la peinture. Moi, je n'ai jamais eu la chance de lire une interprétation, une lecture phénoménologique qui me parle d'une image dans sa dimension de potentiel.
Okay, I think we have to stop here with this panel. Thank you very much to both speakers for this last.